إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: أحل لكم ليلة الصيام الرفث إلى نسائكم هن لباس لكم وأنتم لباس لهن علم الله أنكم كنتم تختانون أنفسكم فتاب عليكم وعفى عنكم فالآن باشروهن وابتغوا ما كتب الله لكم وكلوا واشربوا حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر ثم أتموا الصيام إلى الليل ولا تباشروهن وأنتم عاكفون في المساجد تلك حدود الله فلا تقربوها كذلك يبين الله آياته للناس لعلهم يتقون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. My dear brothers and sisters from across the globe, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Once again, I'm at your service from the holy city of Karbala, from Bain al-Haramain al-Sharifain, from Imam Hussein TV studios here in the holy city of Karbala. Each night we discuss in depth and in detail a verse from the Holy Quran. And in the past 2 nights, we have been examining verses related to fasting and to the holy month of Ramadan. And tonight, we continue in this journey of taking a close look at the holy verses, a selection of some of the verses of the Holy Quran. The verse that I just recited for you or to you is also related to fasting and is also related to the month of Ramadan. And it contains several laws. In fact, it contains 4 laws. It contains admonishment. It contains the philosophy behind marriage and the creation of men and women, these 2 genders, and what purposes do they serve one another. It contains laws pertaining to fasting. This verse tells us of 2 laws that existed in the beginning of Islam, and then they were abrogated, they were changed in order to make things easier for people. Islam, as we know, is a religion of ease and not of difficulty. It is not meant to make people's lives difficult, rather to make their lives easy. We will see that 2 laws that existed in the early period of Islam were abrogated and were changed. This is a brief overview of this verse. It also contains a law pertaining to i'tikaf, the 3 days of remaining in a masjid and fasting in those 3 days. Al-i'tikaf, it contains some laws pertaining to that act of devotion, an act of worship. The verse begins by saying, أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ. It has been made lawful for you the night of fasting to come to your women, to attend to your wives. Of course, the Quran is very polite. It doesn't speak, it doesn't mention the words that we human beings usually use. It uses connotations. It uses examples. The Quran says that the night of fasting, meaning at night when you're not fasting, the eve of the fast, the day that you're fasting, you may attend to your wife. A husband and wife may have, they can have a sexual relationship. They can have sexual intercourse. Of course, the Quran does not use this phrase. The Quran is very polite. and uses connotations instead. Now, the reason that this verse was revealed is that in the beginning of Islam, regarding fasting, there were two laws. One was that sexual intercourse between a husband and his wife was forbidden throughout the month of Ramadan, day and night. Even at night, a man and a woman would not be able to have intercourse. This was in the beginning. And this was difficult for them to bear. For the first Muslims who were in the first stage of Islam, this was a very difficult law. They couldn't bear it. And hence some of them, they attended to their wives at night. Out of lack of self-control, lack of will, lack of patience, they attended to their wives at night. So this was one law, that intercourse was forbidden even at night during the month of Ramadan, throughout the entire month. The second law was that if a person fell asleep at night, when he wakes up, he can no longer eat, even if it was still night. So for example, if he was awake in the early hours of the night, at Maghrib time, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours after Maghrib, and then that person were to fall asleep and then wake up before Fajr, 2-3 hours before Fajr. And by the way, this was the custom. The custom back then, in the early days of Islam, and in fact, this was the custom just a few decades ago. I would hear stories, and I'm sure you hear stories about your grandparents who would go to sleep after Salat al-Isha, after Maghrib and Isha. They would have a bite to eat for dinner, and then an hour or two after Maghrib, they go to sleep, and they wake up before Fajr, or maybe before Fajr, and they don't go to sleep after that. After Fajr, they don't sleep. They go out for work. A shop owner goes and opens his shop. A doctor goes to his office, and so on and so forth. Today things have changed. Today we stay up, till 3 a.m., 4 a.m., sometimes till Fajr. Some people, they fall asleep before Fajr and they don't even wake up for Fajr, and they wake up at noon. Some people wake up in the afternoon. So customs have changed, unfortunately. The night, which is meant to be used for resting, and the day to be used for working, today it's become the opposite. People stay up all night. Of course, the month of Ramadan is an exception. The month of Ramadan is an exception because there's a'mal at night, and people are fasting during the day, and sleeping in the month of Ramadan is equivalent to tasbih, to the remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jal. So Ramadan is an exception, but all year long, some people, they spend the entire night up, and then they sleep till noon, till the afternoon. And the day is completely wasted. Anyhow, so that law in the beginning of Islam was that if a person were to sleep maybe an hour or 2 hours after Maghrib, once they sleep, they can no longer eat and drink. So if they were to wake up before Fajr, several hours before Fajr, they can no longer eat. So as long as they're awake, they can eat. But once they sleep and then wake up again, even if the night is still there, they couldn't eat. Now what happened was the following. One of the Sahaba, by the name of Mat'am bin Jubair, according to one narration, and this is mentioned in Tafsir Al-Amthal, in Al-Mizan, another name is mentioned. Doesn't make a difference. كان شيخا ضعيفا. He was an elderly man. He was an elderly gentleman. So one night he was fasting, and at the time of Maghrib, at the time of Iftar, he didn't eat. The hadith says that his wife had not prepared his Iftar for him. Food wasn't ready. His iftar wasn't ready. So he fell asleep. And when he woke up, his wife wanted to bring him food. He said, no, I can't, because I fell asleep. And now that I've woken up, I can no longer eat, even if it's night, even if Fajr has not yet come, I cannot eat. So he remained fasting. So the night came and ended, and he got up for the next day, and he hadn't eaten anything. The next day, he went to the ditch, Al-Khandaq, Rasulullah and his companions were preparing for the battle of Al-Khandaq. They were digging. Muslims were digging that ditch around Medina so that the kuffar and mushrikeen would not surprise them all of a sudden. So when he went to dig, he lost consciousness. He fainted out of being weak because he hadn't eaten anything the night before. He fainted. So Rasulullah, when he saw this, he was very upset and he felt very sorry for him. So this is one. Two, the hadith says that there were several youth that were married, and this was in the beginning of Islam. They attended to their wives at night. They couldn't control themselves because intercourse was forbidden throughout the entire month of Ramadan. Not just during the day, but at night. So they attended secretly. They attended to their wives and they had intercourse. Here, Allah says that we've changed the law. We've abrogated the law. So this is the reason of revelation, the occasion of revelation behind this verse. So let's start. أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ. The night of fasting. The night of fasting doesn't necessarily need to be the eve of the first of Ramadan. No, it's the eve of every day of Ramadan. So the eve of the first, the eve of the second, the eve of the third, up till the eve of the 29th or the 30th, whenever the month of Ramadan ends. It has been made lawful for you. الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ. الرَّفَث is a connotation for intercourse. You see, the Quran is very polite. The Quran, for example, in another verse says, أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاء. If you touch a female, then you have to perform ghusl. It doesn't say intercourse. It says if you touch. Why? Because the Quran is very polite and it teaches us to be polite. So it uses connotations. Even when using the restroom, the Quran says, أَوْ جَاءَ أَحَدٌ مِّنكُم مِّنَ الْغَائِطِ. غائط is an area that it's sort of, pretend there's a hill or a mountain. Behind the hill, behind the mountain, you go underneath where no one could see you. That's literally what غائط is. The Quran says if anyone comes from غائط, then he has to perform wudu. He who comes from behind the hills, so to speak. It's a connotation for using the restroom. The Quran uses connotations, doesn't speak directly. And that teaches us Muslims to be respectful. When we speak about sensitive topics, we should use connotations. الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ. So, intercourse has been made lawful for you on the eve of fasting. أُحِلَّ comes from إحلال, means to be made permissible. Al-hil is in comparison to al-aqd. Al-hal wal-aqd. Al-aqd is something that is tied. Hal is when you untie something. When you make something free. When you make something loose. When Allah allows something, He's made us free. He's made us loose. Hence, ihlal comes from hil. So, and al-rafat, as we said, is a connotation for anything that shouldn't be said in public, shouldn't be stated out loud. And then the verse says, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنْ. أحل لكم ليلة الصيام الرفث إلى نسائكم هن لباس لكم وأنتم لباس لهم. This section is very beautiful. It's full of meaning. The Quran says that your wives are clothing for you, and you are clothing for your wives. Libas. Libas literally means clothing. A spouse is a clothing for their spouse, for his spouse or her spouse. Why clothing? Why does the Quran use this parable, this example? Why does he give an example of spouses as clothing for one another? لِبَاسٌ هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنْ. Well, let's see what clothing is all about. Clothing protects us. In the winter, it protects us from the cold. In the summer, it protects us from the heat. You cover your head in the heat. You wear a hat. You wear socks. You don't walk on hot sand. In the winter, you wear a jacket. You wear clothing. You wear a coat. You wear a headscarf. So it's for protection. 2, it's an ornament. If you want to look beautiful, you choose beautiful clothing. You choose a beautiful sweater, a beautiful shirt, a beautiful jacket. It's an ornament. It makes us look beautiful. Number 3, it covers our private parts. It doesn't expose us. It covers our bodies, our weaknesses. It covers us. It protects us. It doesn't expose us. We are not exposed to people's eyes. It is our clothing that covers us. It covers our bodies, our weaknesses, our private parts, our most intimate parts are covered by our clothing. Hence, a wife does the same exact thing. A wife is protection. A wife protects her husband, and a husband protects his wife. Protect them from what? From lust, from desire, from shaitan, from hawa nafs. A spouse is protection. When you have a spouse that attends to your needs, you will not be tempted by shaitan. Your eyes will not be lustful. Your eyes will not be wandering around in other places. No, because you are attended to. You are taken care of at home. Due to your spouse, a husband or a wife, they take care of that spouse. That spouse is taken care of emotionally, sexually, intimately, psychologically, mentally. This person is taken care of. Thus, he's protected. And he has an ornament. A husband is decorated with his wife. He feels beautiful. He feels decorated when he has a wonderful wife, when he has a good wife, a supportive wife, a loving wife. And a wife too is decorated with a good husband, with a loving husband, with a supporting husband, with an understanding husband. When a husband and wife complete one another, when a man and woman complete one another, they attend to each other's needs. They're supportive of one another. They understand one another. They stand for each other. They don't neglect one another. They complete one another. And the best relationship between a husband and wife is that if they are friends, if they are companions, not just spouses, but companions. They're like clothing. They protect you. They are an ornament for you. They're an ornament for you. They decorate you and they guard you. They guard your weaknesses. They guard your private parts. They guard us. هن لباس لكم وأنتم لباس لهن. And then the verse says, علم الله أنكم كنتم تختانون أنفسكم. Allah knows that you were deceiving yourself. تختانون comes from khiyana. And khiyana literally means a shortage. Naqs. Naqs, shortage. أنكم كنتم تختانون. You kept on deceiving yourself. You kept on being deceitful. being deceitful because you know that during the nights of Ramadan, you are not allowed to have intercourse. You are not allowed to mix with your spouses, mix in the private sense. But you did. تختانون. It means that you didn't just do it once, but you kept on doing so. علم الله أنكم كنتم تختانون أنفسكم فتاب عليكم. Allah has repented upon you. Allah has forgiven you. وعفى عنكم. Allah has forgiven you. Allah has erased that sin that you were committing, because Allah Azza wa Jal is all merciful and He's all forgiving, and Allah knows that you did not have the ability to handle this obligation and this responsibility. Hence He abrogated this law. This law has been abrogated. You are no longer responsible. The verse says, فَالْآنَ بَاشُرُوهُنَّ. Now you may attend to your wives, and a wife may attend to her husband at night. The nights of Ramadan, this has become permissible because it was difficult. Allah has abrogated this law and has allowed sexual relations between a husband and a wife to be permissible. فَالْآنَ بَاشُرُوهُنَّ. Now attend to your wives. بَاشُرُوهُنَّ is a command. It's an order. However, all scholars believe that it's not wajib. So the verse is not ordering men to attend to their wives every night in the month of Ramadan. No, this is not a command or an order. But rather, in usul al-fiqh, there's a law that says when a command comes after forbiddance, it means that you're allowed. It doesn't mean that it's mandatory. It means it is allowed. Let me give you an example. If you were to go to a doctor and you have an illness, the doctor says, for example, abstain from fruits. You have to abstain from fruits. After a month or 2 months, you go back to the doctor and you perform exams, a blood test, for example. He sees the results and he says that the results are good. Eat fruits. Eat fruits. When he says eat fruits, this is not a command. This is not an order. He's simply saying that now you may eat fruits if you'd like. It is no longer forbidden upon you. فَالْآنَ بَاشُرُوهُنَّ. And now attend to your wives. Meaning that you can. وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. And seek what Allah has written for you. What does this mean? وَابْتَغُوا, and seek that which Allah has written for you. مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. Here, some scholars of tafsir, for example, in Al-Mizan and in Al-Amthal, they say that وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ means that procreate, make children, because that is the purpose behind mating and having intercourse, husband with his wife. The whole purpose is to procreate, is to mate, is to have children. That is what Allah has written for you, to have children, so that the human lineage continues, so that the human race continues, and it doesn't stop at us. You know, in some communities, in some countries, they limit the amount of children to 1 or 2. In China, only 1. In some countries, they encourage to have only 2 children. While if this is the case, then the human race would eventually stop. And this creates disasters and problems. You know, in China, I remember reading a very long report in the Washington Post several years ago, that because there's the one-child policy in China, most parents, they choose to have a boy and not a girl. And this is a problem. This misogynistic culture that doesn't exist just in, you know, in the Middle East, but everywhere. So they chose to have boys, 1 boy. What happens is that there's the male to female ratio is disproportionate. You have so many males and so few females, and then when it's time to get married, they don't find mates. Hence, they have to go to neighboring countries and bring them to China, and so on and so forth. وابتغوا ما كتب الله لكم. Seek what Allah has written for you. Have children. Procreate. وكلوا واشربوا حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر. And eat. This is the second law. We said there were two laws that existed in the beginning of Islam that were abrogated, were changed. The first was that marital relations at night was forbidden. At night and during the day. This was abrogated, and that ban was limited to the day, but at night it was permissible. The second ban was that if you fall asleep, you can no longer eat once you wake up, even if it's still at night. This was changed in this section. وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا. And eat and drink. حتى. Keep on eating and drinking if you like, until you see حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر. Until you see the white string of dawn. The white string of dawn. What does that mean? By the way, Fajr comes from Fajara, to explode or to rip apart. When Fajr comes out, when dawn comes out, it rips apart the night from the day. There's Al-Fajr Al-Kadhib and there's Al-Fajr Al-Sadiq. There's a false dawn and there's a real dawn. What's the false dawn and what's the real dawn? The false dawn is a vertical white line that appears vertically in the sky, and it has been an example of that white line is given. It looks like the tail of a fox, the tail of a fox. Have you seen the tail of a fox? Maybe shaped like this. It shows in the sky. And then it disappears quickly. That is not dawn. Dawn is when a white, thin line, a string, khayt. Khayt means a string. A white line that appears horizontally in the sky. And then this white line begins to grow and grow. That whiteness begins to grow until you see the daybreak. And then the day is completely on the horizon. That is Al-Fajr Al-Sadiq. I've seen Al-Fajr Al-Sadiq many times. On the plane. On flights. If you're on a plane, you could easily see that Fajr. You see a white, thin line across the horizon. And then it starts to expand and expand and expand and expand. The whiteness begins to grow and grow and grow for up to an hour, hour and 15 minutes, hour and 20 minutes, until you see the sun rises. That whiteness is obviously the light of the sun that is reaching us. وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضِ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ. Keep on eating. You may keep on eating and drinking until you sleep. No, but you can eat and drink up till dawn. Al-Fajr. الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر. Unfortunately, because of technology and all the lights in the cities, we can't see dawn. Back then they could, especially in the desert where there's no mountains, there were no lights, right? There was no electricity, so it was very easy to detect dawn. Today in the cities, it's virtually impossible to detect dawn. And hence we need timings. We need a timetable for salah timings. Previously they didn't rely on salah timings. They could detect Fajr and sunrise and noon and Asr, Maghrib and Asha. All of them were detected easily. They could tell the time without having to review a timetable. طيب. And then ثم أتم الصيام إلى الليل. And then once dawn reaches, we abstain from food, from drink, because the verse says eat and drink up until dawn. So what happens after dawn? No more eating and no more drinking and no more intercourse, no more sexual relations with a wife. ثم أتم الصيام. And then complete your fasting till night. Till night. And this is also significant. Fast till night. When is night? Is night the moment that the sun sets, or when it's dark, when it's a bit dark, which is about 15 minutes after sunset? That's night. As soon as the sun sets, it's still light. It's still the afternoon. But give it 15 minutes after the sun sets, it becomes dark. That is night. And that is when the followers of Ahlul Bayt break their fast. And that is when they pray Salat al-Maghrib. وَأَتِمُّ الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. Break your fast at night. When the sun sets, it's not night. It's not night. Ask anyone. Even ask non-Muslims. As soon as the sun sets, ask them, is it night? They tell you no. It's the afternoon. It's sunset. It's still not night. But in 15 minutes, after 15 minutes, ask them, what do you say? Is it day or night? They'll tell you no. Now it's night. Now it's dark. Now it's dark. وَأَتِمُّ الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. Hence the followers of Ahlul Bayt are following the Quran in breaking their fast. And then the verse says, وَلَا تُبَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. And do not attend to your wives when you are performing i'tikaf in mosques. First of all, what is i'tikaf? I'tikaf comes from the root word akafa. Akafa is when a person holds himself to something. Akafa ala al-kitab. He holds himself to reading this book. Akafa ala as-salah. He holds himself to salah. When you bind yourself, when you hold yourself to something, it's called akafa. I'tikaf is when you hold yourself to a mosque for 3 days. And that's the religious meaning of i'tikaf. When you hold yourself to a mosque for 3 days by fasting. Of course, i'tikaf is mustahab. I'tikaf is 3 days of fasting in a masjid. The first day of fasting, you can still leave. It's still not binding. The second day is not binding. But on the third day of i'tikaf, it becomes binding upon you to stay in the masjid. If you fasted the first 2 days, you have to fast the third day. Although i'tikaf is mustahab, but on the third day, it becomes wajib. You may not leave. We stay in the masjid for 3 days by fasting, and we spend it in worship, in acts of devotion. And this is a social act of worship. It's spiritual, it's uplifting, it's educational. And I've seen that in some communities in the West, they perform i'tikaf. And there's other communities that have not yet performed this great deed, which is full of benefits. وَلَا تُبَاشِرُوهُنْ. This verse mentions only one of the laws of i'tikaf, and that is sexual relations are not allowed in these 3 days and nights. Days and nights, because this person is in a masjid, and it is haram to have such an act inside a masjid. And that person may not leave the masjid for 3 days. Part of the law of i'tikaf is that you may not leave the masjid. You have to remain in the masjid for 3 days. وَلَا تُبَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. And do not attend to your wives or to your spouses while you are performing i'tikaf in the masjid. تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا. These are the laws of Allah. Do not trespass them. These are the laws. These are the guidelines. These are the red lines. حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَعْتَدُوهَا. Do not transgress. Do not disobey these laws. كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ آيَاتِهِ. And so Allah shows His signs. And so He guides آياته للناس لعلهم يتقون. And so Allah shows His signs to the people so that they may be pious. لعلهم يتقون. Perhaps they may be pious and show piety. Again, Allah reminds us the purpose behind fasting and the reason behind the legislation behind fasting, and that is for people to reach piety, to become pious, to become God-fearing, to fear God and not disobey Him and come closer to Allah. The same way He began the verses of fasting by telling us that it helps us reach piety. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. The verses of fasting began with piety and they ended with piety. كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ آيَاتِهِ لِلنَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. I ask Allah to help us in reaching the stage of piety and to be pious and to increase our piety, inshaAllah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه